Wilderness is where we come to learn about our being persons. One of the nice things about personhood is it isn't exclusive to humans. The 10,000 things are full of personality. I got to know him partly because I was lost, trying to figure out my life. I had majored in literature. I ran into a student of Bugbee's, and he sort of helped me get into the master's program at the University of Montana, but they weren't certain whether I could really garden it well, plow the row or whatever. So they stuck me in a class with Henry. It was one of my first classes, and he had just retired. And rather than let him go out to pasture, they were unleashing him with all the grad students and letting him sort of have his way with classes. The first class he taught was this symposium in which we read all these essays he had sort of published, but many cases hadn't. I call it the white book because it was originally in this white mimeograph book. And so we read through those essays. But Henry was worried that I wouldn't really do well, so I took it pass-fail. Just that sort of generosity and that willingness to work with where he found things rather than, making it all clear what is good and what is not. Certainly I was obscure, and he was willing to pay attention to me. And I think, that maybe being obscure gives you a feeling for obscurity. I sort of like that thought. He was incredibly good looking, the Cary Grant of philosophy, sort of rugged jaw. Had all that down, but that wasn't what you really noticed about him. There was a sort of openness and a sort of glee. He had that childlike twinkle, like you'd think of in a Zen master all the time. But he listened well to people when they had philosophical questions, took them seriously. And then he invited student commentary, and there was a lot of give and take, and it could really get riffing. I mean, it was like jazz almost. He spoke in paragraphs. He didn't speak in sentences. And so one of the first things I noticed in class, this was going to be just this gorgeous experience of having somebody speak as if they were reading a book, but they were just speaking off the top of their heads. He had an incredible gift for inhabiting the English language and having the language inhabit him and taking you different places with it. It was very much like a Bach fugue. You take one theme and it sort of works, and all of a sudden you're hearing another theme in it, and you take it somewhere and it works, and then you take another theme and it works. But just the way his thoughts struck us, it was amazing. Putting literature and philosophy in contact with one another and letting them sort of work on one another. That was very definitely the loveliness in what he inspired, at least in me and many of the other students that he worked with. I was hanging out at a house right across the alley from him, and he said, "Hey, come over, you should give me some of your papers." And he and Sally sat down with me. They got me sort of drunk on wine. We had lots of spaghetti. He worked through my 2 papers. I talked about a problem. He says, "Not a problem. There are questions, and I totally get that, absolutely." I sort of avoid the notion of Henry being authentic, and I think of him as fluent. You just get taken away with these ideas, and you'd be hard-pressed to even repeat them. And I think that's exactly his point. You don't repeat them. To ask, "Oh, what did you just say?" is to ask again, to take up with the question, now already altered by the way that you have heard what was already taken up with. So that aliveness and the fact that thought is so much more witnessed than it is recorded. And by the way, I only came to really know Henry's thought as it began to work itself into me over the years, which is maybe the sign of a great thinker. There was early stuff, and I was getting it and, sort of thinking through. And then I went and was studying a lot of other philosophers. Henry kept showing up again. And I think that would be precisely the way Henry would show up. And I guess I'm talking about me more than I am Bugbee, and I apologize for that. But it's the way Bugbee works, right? He sort of gives you a chance to think and be with those thoughts in a way that really is alive, and I'm so thankful for that. I can remember after his stroke, I don't know, maybe it's like a photographic plate. Whatever was deepest in him was still there, and it just seemed sort of bemused at his plight. Sort of smiled. And I can also remember him being very excited right before that stroke. He was going to finally do another paper in response to a paper that somebody had given at the university on his thought. And he was really sort of like intense and focused again. And it was sort of exciting to think that he was going to like write some philosophy, make a statement, and then it just dissipated. So I saw him in a sense in his retirement years, right up to his death.